I remember there was one colleague of mine. He was from South India, so he could not understand Hindi that well. And we went to meet a client in Kolkata, and that person is talking in like some like very Hindi, like very fluent Hindi, and he's not able to understand. But every few seconds, this person will say 19-20, right? So then this guy starts everything that he thinks that okay, 19-20 is a slang that this guy is using. So then he starts using 19-20, right? He's like, sir, number is like 100 CR, but 19-20 हो जाएगा.
We were talking about prestigious companies, and you switched to one of these prestigious companies, which is BNP Paribas, and you had 3 roles possibly, and this is what you have written in your LinkedIn. One is of an analyst, where you start. One is of an associate, and the other one is when you retire, or not retired, when you quit the organization as a VP, right? So let's talk about these 3. As an analyst, what do you do in a BNP Paribas? What happens when you become an associate? And what happens when you become a VP in a company like it?
Yeah. So I think investment banking, typically teams like are pretty small, right? It's very well-oiled, small teams, and every deal you'll have like only 3 to 4 people, right? So while you have the typical hierarchy would be like there is a managing director or a managing partner, if you want to call it, and then there is a ED or a VP, and then there is an associate, and then there's an analyst. That's how typically this will flow. Any deal you will have at least a VP who's overlooking it, an associate, and an analyst, right? And at one point in time, analyst could be working on 3-4 deals, pitches at the same time. But the job of the VP is to oversee the entire kind of role. So as you progress over the organization, your role obviously keeps changing, right? Typically, the analyst kind of program is like 2 to 3 years in every kind of investment bank. Then you graduate towards an associate, where you spend again 2 to 3 years. And then depending on how good you're doing, you basically become a vice president. At an analyst at a foreign bank, you could easily make somewhere around 40 to 70 lakhs for the first 2 years, in like every year, right? That's the kind of thing, because there is a fixed component and there's a variable component, which is completely dependent on your performance and the firm's performance. That's an analyst level. Associate would definitely be somewhere between 50 to 80. And this is all foreign banks. Domestic will be definitely much lower, right? So you can at least assume a 50% haircut to this. VP again depends. It can be 70 to 1.2, and then I think for MDs it can be varying from 1 to 5, depending on again how it is, right? So it can be very wide, but obviously the guys in the American investment banks have a very different scale altogether, right? So at an analyst level, I think it's the first step into the door, right? There, I think the intention is that you first of all are in charge of looking at the entire financial models, the PowerPoint decks that you have to make, and you have to spend maximum amount of time in the office, right? That you have to make sure you have to review the models, you have to keep basically building everything from scratch, and then the entire deck, and then you have an associate who is basically overseeing some part of your work, right? And both of you have to work together to give out an output to the VP. Right, and VP obviously will review the entire presentation, look at how the deck is flowing, whether it is flowing in line or not, whether it is as per the expectations of the managing director and also the client, because typically analysts may or may not go to all meetings, associates should go to all meetings, but VP and MD will definitely go to all the meetings, right? So they are the closest to the client. Idea is that they need to understand the pulse of both the market as well as what the client wants to achieve, right? Whether through an M&A, whether through taking the company public, whichever kind of deal you're working on. But they understand that kind of pulse, and they are trying to get the kind of key kind of messages going in the presentation. Also, from a number standpoint, they have to make sure that the numbers are all like to the T, right, in some manner, right? So there's no mistake. The formatting is good. The numbers, the valuation, everything is as per what you should be doing, right? So most of the time, the overnighters and the kind of detail oriented work is done by the analysts and the associates, and the vice VPs and all. They have the most client interaction, so they have to present to the client, they have to travel a lot, they have to do both the jobs of finding new business and also making sure that existing deals get executed, right? So till you're an analyst and associate, the pressure of getting new business is not on you. If you can get it, great, but the idea is that you have to focus on something which the managing director and the vice president are getting from a business side of view, and also the pitches and all. but the pressure of new business, so you don't have a P&L or a sales target on your head. But as you obviously graduate in an organization, those kind of things start populating for you.
Great. I think that's very valuable information for a lot of freshers who are interested in this kind of a space. Let's move on to some of the stories, because you are in the storytelling business, we are in the storytelling business, and it's incomplete to understand any sector or any particular role without stories. So tell me one such story that you remember that included Indian clients, and one particular story that included any Western client for that matter, that you still remember, still cherish, because of the kind of things that you had to go through and the kind of results that you gotten.
No, I think every kind of deal had its own nuances to it, had its own flavors to it, right? Because I think one thing that I've always learned, which I think was a big learning from me from investment banking, that you have to know your audience. Like if the audience is a CEO of a large company who's very strong with numbers, you have to make sure your deck and everything is very, very tight on numbers. But the other thing is that if there is a person who is more of a storyteller and wants to just look at the bigger picture, then you have to talk in that sense, right? So I remember one of the instances where and this is a very peculiar Indian kind of situation. Not many people understand, right? That while I think a lot of the Americans and Europeans are very hardcore number guys, like on the corporate side, that they will go deep into what side of numbers, how they look at valuation. Indians are more feel, like that. So for example, you go on a meeting and you start talking about numbers, and then they'll start saying कि 19-20 ठीक लग रहा है, right? So 19-20. I remember there was one colleague of mine. He was from South India, so he could not understand Hindi that well, and we went to meet a client in Kolkata, and that person is talking in like some like very, very Hindi, like very fluent Hindi, and he's not able to understand. But every few seconds, this person will say 19-20, right? So then this guy starts everything that he thinks that okay, 19-20 is a slang that this guy is using. So then he starts using 19-20, right? He's like, sir, number is like 100 CR, but 19-20 ho jayega. So this guy, then the client is starting here, what are you talking about? What 19-20 are you referring to? So that was a situation where you had to tell him, please hold off, you don't understand the language. So that kind of language peculiarities also happen. And there was one deal which was a European company trying to acquire something in India. And typically you have these processes where you have like M&A deals where there's a seller and there's a buyer, and seller looks at talking to a multiple set of investors or buyers, right? So that's like an auction kind of a process. But sometimes you have something where the buyer and seller are both agreeable that we should do a deal together, which is like a bilateral deal. But the challenge with bilateral deal is that there is no timeline, there is no set criteria. Like everybody's at their own nuance that we'll do a deal casually, right? So there was one of my first deals that I did where a European client was looking to buy a company in India, and the Indian team and the Indian company was like a very promoter-driven family business. So they put a value on the business and they said, "Acha, theek hai, we make sense." But then after 3 weeks they'll come back, "No, we need 50 CR more," right? And these guys, Europeans, are like, "What are you talking about? Like we believe in EPS, like earnings per share, and you are talking about some random thing." So then talks got stalled. Then again they will come back, we see a huge potential in India. We are okay with that 50 CR extra. And then everybody come back to the table. And then again, these guys, Indian families being Indian families, they're like, I need 100 CR more because this is what has happened. The business has gone to a turn. So every 6 months it used to happen. That deal took good 2.5 years to close. And I was the analyst who was like running numbers every 6 months. Something has happened and the numbers have gone up. I don't know why. The valuation numbers have gone up. So I remember there's a final negotiating table, right? And there's a European sitting and there's an Indian founder sitting, right? And they could not agree on something. And like 5 o'clock, they both went to the rooms and said, deal is off. It's not happening. And then I remember my boss, my MD, right? He obviously was a very hardcore numbers guy, but he also knew the emotional side of things, right? That, okay, deals are between two people and you have to satisfy people's egos. Right. So then basically in the middle of the night, he called us and he said, okay, I want you to write a letter on behalf of the seller on behalf of the buyer, because we were on the buy side that time, that okay, we understand these are your these are your limitations, these are the value, and we'll work together in a certain manner. So it was a very less numbers but more emotional kind of a letter that we want to work on this, but this you can't keep changing things that way, right? And then in the middle of the night, the letter went from the buyer to the seller, and in the morning the seller was back on the table. right? And it was very interesting that it was not about like the deals are not about numbers all the time. It's all about two people. You have to obviously make sure that their ambitions, their aspirations are achieved in certain manner, and but their egos are also satisfied, right? Because these are big boys who are on the table, right? So I think those kind of situations are I think they are always there.
Before we move on from investment banking, let's talk about a few resources that you refer to regularly when it comes to investment banking, and somebody who wants to get in and understand this a little better, what should they be reading?
No, I think it's always it's always best if you can find a good internship in, because that will give you the real flavor of the job. But I think you should be very much firstly aware about the key financial terms, right? So you need to have your either you are good at accounting, or at least you need to be good with numbers. That is very important. Then I think you need to have a good sense of what is happening in the market, right? So Economic Times or Mint or any of those kind of public newspapers which are there, like InsideIIM, some of the other kind of publications which talk about how finance works, right? I think those are important kind of pillars that you need to have. But you should also know about the deals that are happening in the market, right? So there are like obviously these are very high end kind of publications. The Bloomberg is a great thing which talks about a lot of numbers on companies, right? Then you have a lot of these Deals Asia, a lot of these kind of New York Times, a lot of these FT Financial Times, right? A lot of those kind of publications give you in-depth analysis of how a lot of M&A deals have worked, right? So that gives you a flavor of the kind of synergies, why deals happen, what drives people to do M&As, right? So I think that can give you some flavor about it. But I think the best thing would always be to just try to get an internship, because the real world could be very, very different from what you are reading in a paper.